Namaste and good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from Canada, Calgary. This is Rita Dungal with Alberta Assembly of Social Workers. Our team is very excited to be here and share who we are as it relates to Alberta College of Social Assembly of Social Workers and our community-led responses to COVID-19 crisis. Our team will introduce themselves as we go through this presentation. Today, we are talking on resisting and redefining social work's response through mutual aid, a story from the pandemic. Next slide, please. To begin, I would like to start with acknowledgement and commitment, our commitment. We acknowledge that we live, work, and build community on the traditional lands of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and express our gratitude and appreciation for all Indigenous peoples around the world. We also acknowledge our commitments to reconciliation and peace building.
Hello everyone, I am Veronica Chirino. I am a Master Social Work student at the University of Calgary. About the Alberta Assembly of Social Workers. We started getting together in January 2020 in response to the injustice against Wet'suwet'en and their land rights, and we've been continue meeting since then. We welcome social workers as well as activists. The Assembly is anti-colonial, anti-racist, equity-seeking civil action group. We stand against all forms of oppression. We're seeking social justice for all. We are grounded in a social work praxis of personal transformation, relational accountability, peace building, and solidarity action. The Assembly provides social justice seekers a non hierarchical and consensus based platform to organize, take action, and live the values of social justice.
Migrants in Canada have faced a unique set of barriers when dealing with COVID-19. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the impacts on our communities. This includes a lack of community support, racism, healthcare segregation, language barriers, and the increased stress of having family in other regions of the world. These all compound the effect that the pandemic has had on racialized migrants in Canada. Immigrants are also disproportionately represented in jobs with greater exposure to COVID-19 as frontline and essential service workers, jobs in which they are abused, used, and disposed by the system. Racialized migrants are also more likely to work in industries worst affected by the pandemic, such as food and accommodation services, compounding health and economic risks. Immigrants and visible minorities in Canada are more likely to face harassment, racist attacks, and stigma, and have less or no access to justice when their immigration status is precarious. So that's why in Alberta, we advocate for and organize with temporary foreign workers and seasonal agricultural workers. Racism, hate, labor segregation, and systemic barriers are nothing new to our communities, but the COVID-19 pandemic made these conditions visible to everyone. For once, Canadians were forced to see and realize where the services and goods they consume come from: essential workers, racialized hands, and racialized lives.
Hi everyone, my name is Nelly Alvarez and I am one of the members of the Alberta Assembly of Social Workers. In addition to what Vanessa mentioned about racialized workers, for decades, Canada relied on temporary foreign workers and agricultural workers, predominantly from overexploited countries, to fill fundamental work that are dangerous, dirty, and devalued. And this work are commonly found on farms, greenhouses, meat plants, factories, healthcare, and food sectors. The pandemic has reshaped our understanding of essential labor. It does not only highlighted how precarious, undocumented, and migrant workers sustain the Canadian society, but it exposes the social and economic inequities and vulnerabilities they face daily. The precarious immigration status of temporary foreign workers and agricultural workers made them more susceptible to abuse and to exploitation. It further escalated their vulnerability in multiple ways. For example, while everyone was entitled for financial relief programs launched by the Government of Canada and support from their respective employers, they were treated as others who were excluded or faced multiple barriers in accessing services.
For this part of our presentation, we'd like to share our stories and how we came to do this work together. My name is Liza Lorenzetti. I am a member of the Assembly of Social Workers. I am also a settler-occupier from Italian heritage, living on these traditional lands of the Blackfoot Confederacy. I've been a social worker for about 30 years and an activist for longer. And so when the pandemic, at the onset of the pandemic, many of us, social workers, activists, friends, we'd been doing social justice work together for quite some time. And the pandemic just brought one more spotlight into so many injustices that we were already engaged in working against. Among them was the judicial violence, police violence, and ongoing colonial violence against Indigenous peoples in these lands and Black people as well. And these were highlighted through the multiple and ongoing violence that continued to occur against these communities, even while people were in isolation. So for many of us who had been doing work in the community, we thought, what can we do while lockdown was happening? How can we get together? How can we come together to make a difference with the restrictions that were happening? We knew many members of our community were suffering, and we knew they would be suffering in isolation further. Many organizations and agencies were shut down. People were in their homes. What about those who didn't have places to go? What about those who relied on those services and supports? Several of us got together, first virtually, by phone, in yards, any form of communication, and started to talk about what we could possibly do. And that is where our story as an activist assembly really took off during the pandemic.
My name is Sarah Thomas. I'm a recent graduate of the BSW program from the University of Calgary. And the assembly really was invaluable to me as I was finishing up my degree when COVID-19 happened and my practicum was canceled. And I kind of had this natural opportunity to join the Assembly of Social Workers based on pre-existing relationships with some of the organizers. It really felt like this was an experience that I wasn't going to get anywhere else. And I learned what it really meant to be in solidarity with the community and find people who shared those values with me. And I got to kind of live and practice the values of social justice. And it was really special to watch throughout the assembly between our members, but also the communities that we were working with, the emergence of this community of communities and the relationships that have grown and built from there and that we still have.
Hi, everyone. Again, this is Rita again. I will briefly highlight my engagement and involvement in responding to COVID-19 crisis. I was involved in internationalization work and also food hamper. Firstly, while talking internationalization in responding to COVID-19 crisis, we raised funding for one of the organizations providing shelter for orphans and children with disabilities in Nepal. I'm originally from Nepal. With that support, the agency was able to pay 1 year housing rent and buy some food and cloth. Through this involvement, I also recognized that we had an opportunity to build relationship with the agency in international setting. And secondly, food hamper. While we are collecting food for temporary migrants, I was involved in reaching out to ethnic communities, including Nepali, Punjabi, Sikh communities, and Hindu and Muslim communities. and also providing education around the challenges experienced by the temporary migrants who later supported our food hamper. In addition, my involvement in youth mobilization for the collection of food hamper, which also helped youth to critically understand the pre-existing injustice escalated by COVID-19, and also the importance of solidarity and community-led responses to injustice.
Hello again. I am originally from Mexico, and in 2020, when the pandemic hit, I was starting my program at the university. Everything went online, and it was really special that we got together with people in the community with similar values, and I had the chance of organizing with Professor Regine King, with Jill, collaborate with the church that is the community where I live in Ranchlands, as well as with the BOAS Community Resource Center. And at that time that people were staying at their houses, that they were getting, some of them, they were getting COVID, we could just go and share and reach out to the people that we could support bringing groceries to their houses. We can support in different ways that they needed, and it really was creating more community and solidarity around us and around the people that we were collaborating with, and that was very special. As Sarah mentioned, we still have and continue those relationships, still meeting, and as well we were reaching out with Vanessa and Nelly for migrant workers, seasonal workers in the farms, and it's work that is still going on.
Hi everyone, this is Nelly again. My personal story is I came to Canada as a temporary foreign worker under the Live-in Caregiver program, and then I am now a registered social worker working in the field of family and social services. But during the pandemic, the Assembly of Social Workers has been truly instrumental in for me in gathering support for precarious workers, many of whom I personally know through my advocacy work in the migrant justice field. And while I think while the social work field has been highlighting the importance of self-care without providing context about the role of the community, the assembly for me solidified what true self-care means, because the assembly provide a concrete meaning that self should always be connected to the community, and that's what the assembly showed to me. Caring for my own self is also about caring for the community, and caring for the community is also about caring for myself. And I think the COVID-19 really showed us that we are all connected. If one has a virus, it could spread to everyone, and the importance of healthcare access for everyone, not just to individuals with full immigration status, but for everyone, regardless of status, race, class, gender, regardless. A human being needs to have access to basic social services, especially the life-sustaining healthcare. And yeah, that's what for me the assembly has taught me. It's a venue to love and to rage, to love the community and to rage for those who have been long oppressed.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa Ortiz. I am an uninvited guest residing in Treaty 7 territory, but I was born and raised in the original territories of the Coalesced Nations, which we now call Northern Mexico. I am an educator, so I am a teacher, but I am also a decolonial and anti-oppression community organizer for the Mexican community of migrant farm workers in Alberta. And our work and the work of the Assembly has relied on the human connections that we foster and that we care for with our community members. And really, during the pandemic, we learned more and more about the challenges that our community faces. So some examples of the challenges of our community is that we work with the seasonal agricultural workers program, which it's a program that it's broken, and it's based on an oppressive scheme that has been operating for decades in Canada to provide this country with cheap labor, with workers from Mexico, Central America, and Caribbean nations who work under very unjust conditions, abusive employers, and a racist immigration system that promotes family separation and labor injustice. And so some of the challenges that we learned about during the pandemic were mobility issues, all the different expenses that migrant workers were facing. For example, the testing that they had to get done, which had a huge financial impact on them. And more than everything, the further isolation that led to abuse in rural Alberta. And this is given the total control that they live under with their employers, given that their immigration status is precarious and they are here as seasonal workers, right? And so although they are living in congregate settings and are living in an increased risk for the spread of COVID, they were often facing lack of access to healthcare and healthcare segregation. For example, they were one of the last groups to be able to access vaccination, and they were not very likely to report injuries or other health issues due to their fear of deportation. So what the Alberta Assembly of Social Workers worked on during the pandemic really was an essential part of the work that we've done, because it has always relied on informed advocacy, which is solidarity based, but not solidarity building, but not based on theoretical information, right? Not based on papers or on, it's bringing that to practice, and it's listening to community members and learning, really listening and really learning what are the needs, and coming up with solutions that have gone from fundraising to different rallies, to driving farm workers to getting vaccinated, getting vaccination appointments, even if it's worker by worker, but really getting that work done. And so we're often asked, how can we help? What can we do? Once people are presented with a problem, it's very common that people are going to ask, but what can we actually do? So one of the things that I have admired the most about the Alberta Assembly is that we do have the analysis, but it's also about actions, concrete actions that we conduct after listening and learning from community members. So this community approach has really been very valuable for us.
So at the onset of the pandemic, when our communities became more isolated, one of the roles that I took on was of convener initially, just finding out who was doing what actions were already being taken, and bringing our members together. And what I discovered right away is that social workers and activists were already organizing. They were already mobilizing almost on day 2 of the pandemic, because as Nelly talked about, people were thinking about others. They were thinking beyond themselves. They were thinking about how the pandemic could impact members of our community, especially those who were mostly disadvantaged already by systemic oppression. And so from that, we gathered our volunteer activist core and started reaching out into our individual neighborhoods, including our localities. And so each social worker or each activist who was in a different locality was checking in their neighborhoods who needed what was being done, what was not being done. And so part of our work was actually leafleting door by door, reaching out to people who we knew, maybe seniors, maybe living alone, maybe new parents, immigrant families, Indigenous families, anyone who we might have thought needed an extra support, anyone who we thought was isolated or even, on the edge already of not being able to meet their needs. And so this leafleting, this identifying happened at the same time that we were trying to reach out to existing organizations such as community associations that actually had a role of being in the community. What we did find out is that most community associations were not engaged in that critical fundamental needs and advocacy work, which the Assembly of Social Workers, the Association of Mexicans in Calgary, Migrante, and other organizations were already doing. And so the community relied oftentimes on us to lead the way. But volunteers did come, people did come forward. There was, although we hear a lot about the negativity around the pandemic, there were a lot of people quietly in the grassroots doing amazing work. And I was thrilled to be part of that. One of the long-standing contributions I think our family was involved in, and everyone here presenting has continued to support, is we put a free food library right in front of our house. We established it probably a month into the pandemic. It's still running now. It's used by multiple people a day. It's filled up by our neighbors, by our friends, by our families, and we continue to support community through that give and take approach. Very different from social work, where you need to do a needs-based assessment. It can oftentimes be humiliating, degrading, to have to tell your story in order to get your basic needs met. The food library, free food library, is a space of community where people engage with one another, and we promote a sense of give and take, that we are all in this together, which has been a motto of the pandemic, but oftentimes not the case, because people are oftentimes not in it together. There are those that are more impacted than others. So I was happy to be part of this work with this group.
As Lisa was saying, this work looked very different, certainly for me, than any other social work practice that I have been involved in or learned about. And it really was like the love and passion that all of us brought together and established both self-care and community care. I remember our weekly meetings were such a breathing space for me, and we were all joining from our own spaces of isolation. And looking back on it, like, I can't remember all of the things that we did together. We'll never be able to present on all the things that we did together. And I think coming from a place of love and trusting relationships allowed us to be really quick responders. We took actions really immediately, writing letters to policymakers overnight. We were supporting each other, texting each other while we were on hold to speak at city council meetings. We were not going to let anyone be in our way of taking action. And those are really, really special memories. And to bring communities along into this work with us was really beautiful and something that I'll always remember.
So as the pandemic wore on, community members reached out to us that they were getting contacted regarding the increasing rates of domestic violence, mental health concerns, which we'd all read about were happening within our very communities. In response, the Assembly of Social Workers began to host a number of webinars and lunch and learns online to help community members help others access the needed resources and make connections to services and supports that were currently moving online and making themselves available. Our work was so multifaceted, and it continues to grow. This presentation is not long enough for us to discuss all the ways that the Assembly of Social Workers and our partner organizations were involved in community work together as local and global citizens. We've selected some elements of our approach to share with you, just so you would have a good idea of the types of principles and practices that we used in our work. Mutual aid was one of our founding principles, the idea that we are all citizens of the world. We're all here together. There are no nations and boundaries, despite the systems that try to implement them. In that, we work together, we benefited from the work, and we built relationships. Trust building was a key approach. Without trust, the work could not be done. We mobilized while at the same time learning and sharing our knowledges. We worked in areas of systems advocacy on the areas of racism, the immigration system, that is ongoing colonial system, working in tandem with land right claims and supports. We also worked in the grassroots, in solidarity movements. When one organization or community member would identify an issue of injustice, we would gather around it. From there, we built networks of support, or what we called community of communities, and we began to extend our communities both locally and globally. Our locality engagement were oftentimes the spaces of isolation that we referred to from which we gathered. We also gathered on our lawns, in our cars, on the streets, and wherever we needed to be to make a difference.
So as Liza mentioned, we were involved in multi-level series of actions. We did some webinars to respond to domestic violence and mental health concerns. And as mentioned by many of us, we had food and basic need deliveries throughout the community, especially to those temporary farm workers and undocumented migrants that were quarantining, not only in Calgary, but also in Brooks and High River. We made letters to policymakers, and then we did healthcare advocacy, which, for everyone, regardless of status, to have basic healthcare access. Yeah, so we did anti-racism vigil and actions, protests, and social justice rallies, because during this time as well, the unfortunate discovery of the Kamloops residential school, where it was, during this time as well. So we did a lot of protest actions as well as vigil to recognize the need of the community to heal and to also discuss what we have to do as social workers, and support the Indigenous issues. So we also had international solidarity work with both Nepal and Pakistan. We did community consultations on anti-racism and supporting queer community against conversion therapy. Many of us actively participated on those consultations and really discussed, not only what we encountered as social workers, but also what we had faced, for me personally, as a racialized migrant woman in Canada.
I want to just take a moment to reflect that this work really called us to reflect on the future of social work and call us to reimagine our role as social workers. As mentioned, COVID-19 brought to light many existing social inequities as well as new ones, but it also was a time that reinforced the depth of our connections and reminded us of our responsibility to reimagine and manifest a new society and really think about how we want to move forward out of this time. The efforts from the Assembly, as well as partners like Migrante Alberta, was a true demonstration of solidarity action. And it required us to be not only creative and flexible, but also to prioritize authentic relationships and to be closely connected to those who are systematically oppressed. For social workers, we must resist allegiance to the charity model. It directly interferes with our ability to practice mutual aid, to resist being another operator of systems of oppression, and instead connect with our communities as global citizens, meaning to establish genuine solidarity networks, prioritizing engagement, recognizing unequal power relationships, committing to mutual respect, and the inclusion of community members in our quests of allyship and solidarity.
Thank you very much for listening to this presentation. And we are adding here where you can find us in Facebook as well as Twitter. And we added Liza and I our email. So if you want to reach out, please do. We will be very happy to continue having conversations about this. Thank you.